I've always been the guy who plays by the rules. I'm not a feelings guy. Hell, I rarely let my emotions get in the way of anything. It's all about logic, control, and making sure everything in my life goes according to plan. That's how my father raised me. He was a military man turned corporate exec, and I'm sure you can guess what kind of lessons he drilled into me. Things had to be done a certain way, and emotions were the last thing you ever let cloud your judgment. So when I met Kimberly, I didn't think much of it. She was the opposite of me, spontaneous, carefree, unpredictable. I thought she was a nice distraction, maybe something to keep life interesting. She was fun, sure, but I was still Dan Malloy. I didn't let things get too messy. But somehow, she made her way into my life. It started slow. A dinner here, a few laughs there, but I could never shake off the feeling that she was a storm just waiting to hit. And hit she did. The more we spent time together, the more I found myself slipping out of my meticulously structured life. She made me feel things I didn't know I was capable of. It was like I had spent my entire life building this fortress around me, and Kimberly was the hurricane that knocked it all down. She had a way of making everything seem so alive. It wasn't always comfortable, but damn, it was exhilarating. Before I knew it, I was marrying her. She was my wife, and we were building a life together, one I didn't think would be possible without chaos. But there was something else in the air, something I couldn't put my finger on. Kimberly never seemed to fully settle down. She was always seeking out the next adventure, and while it wasn't exactly a deal-breaker for me, I couldn't ignore that nagging voice in the back of my mind. She was wild, free-spirited, and I was the complete opposite. But I convinced myself that I could handle it. After all, I had everything under control. We had a family, a business empire that was growing, and everything seemed perfect. Well, perfect in the way it was supposed to be, at least. But then, things started to change. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't like one day I came home and caught her in the act. No, this was something that built up slowly, like the tide creeping up until it was too high to ignore. I started noticing things. Little things at first. Her late nights, her secretive glances at her phone, the strange looks she'd give me when I asked simple questions. I tried to push it away, tell myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something was off. Then one day, I saw her. I saw her with him. That moment hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her with another man. It was everything that came with it, the lies, the betrayal, the sudden unraveling of everything I thought I knew. I've always prided myself on being able to control the situation, to stay calm and collected, but I felt something snap inside of me in that moment. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. But I also knew that I wasn't going to let this be the end. I wasn't going to be some guy who just let his wife walk all over him. No, I needed answers. And I was going to get them. No matter what. So here I am, sitting on the edge of this cliff, unsure of what comes next. I've always been the one who can handle everything, the one who stays cool under pressure, but now, I'm not so sure. I don't know what's real anymore. All I know is that this has shattered my world, and I'm not just going to let it slide. I'm going to get to the bottom of this, even if it means facing some uncomfortable truths about the woman I thought I knew. Even if it means facing the possibility that everything I've built with Kimberly could come crashing down. I couldn't stop thinking about that day. The day I saw Kimberly with him. The day everything shifted. It wasn't like some dramatic confrontation scene you'd see in a movie. No, it was just a quiet moment that hit me harder than I ever imagined. I was at the office, wrapped up in work, when I saw her text. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Just a regular I miss you message, one of those sweet things she'd send when she was traveling or out with friends. But something about it seemed off. I can't explain it, but my gut told me I needed to dig deeper. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing. Kimberly loved me. We had everything: success, family, stability. She wouldn't jeopardize all of that for some fling, right? I pushed the thought out of my head and got back to work. But, as the day went on, I couldn't ignore it. I'd always been the kind of person who trusted logic over anything else, but this was different. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't really seen her in a while. I mean, I saw her every day, she was there in the house in our life, but was she really there? I started noticing the small things again, the late nights, the random days when she'd be busy with errands or meetings. At first, it seemed like nothing, just her doing her own thing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't really felt close to her in months. She was slipping away. And I had let it happen. But there was something else I couldn't ignore. When I saw her with him, the guy at that stupid coffee shop, all cozy with her, laughing like they had known each other forever, I felt my stomach drop. I knew she wasn't cheating on me in the traditional sense, but the connection they had? It was clear. I wasn't stupid. This wasn't just some casual friendship. The way she leaned in close to him, the way they whispered to each other like no one else was around, it was too intimate for comfort. I needed to know more. So I started paying attention. I watched her more closely, checked her phone, her social media, the things she didn't tell me. I told myself it wasn't paranoia. It wasn't insecurity. It was just logic. I couldn't ignore the facts. So I did what I had to do. I started looking for evidence. And when you're someone like me, who spent his entire life building a reputation for being meticulous and thorough, you don't leave anything to chance. I wanted concrete proof before I confronted her. I needed to be sure. The first few days, nothing. But then I found it. A text. A simple, innocuous one. But it was enough to confirm everything I'd been feeling. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you. That was all it took. My heart sank, and my mind started spinning. All those little things I had brushed off suddenly clicked together in a sickening pattern. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I knew I couldn't. I needed more. So I watched. I waited. I kept my distance, pretending like everything was normal. But inside, everything felt like it was unraveling. Every moment I spent in the house with her felt like a lie, and I couldn't escape the feeling that she was slipping away from me, either physically or emotionally. Or both. I had built this life, this empire, and I was proud of what we'd accomplished together. But now, it all seemed fragile. Every piece of the perfect picture I had crafted with Kimberly seemed like it could shatter at any moment. And no matter how much I tried to stay calm, to keep my emotions in check, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I wasn't just dealing with a broken trust. I was dealing with the unraveling of everything I thought I knew about my wife, my life, and even myself. And that scared the hell out of me. It was a Wednesday when I finally decided to confront her. I had everything I needed, screenshots of the texts, the knowledge of who the guy was, and 1,000 thoughts racing in my head. I kept playing out the conversation in my mind, trying to predict how it would go. Would she confess right away? Would she lie through her teeth? I couldn't be sure, but I knew one thing. I was done living in the dark. It was late in the evening when I got home. Kimberly was sitting on the couch, watching TV, like everything was fine. She didn't even look up when I walked in. That's the thing about her, she always seemed so casual, so detached, like nothing ever really fazed her. It was maddening sometimes. I stood there for a moment, just watching her. I had no idea what was going through her mind, but I knew what was going through mine. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, every emotion I'd been trying to suppress for days was bubbling to the surface. I had to say something. I couldn't just sit there pretending like everything was fine. Kimberly, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk. She glanced at me briefly, but didn't seem concerned. About what? About you and him, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She froze. I watched her face change in an instant, from calm to something else. Something defensive. What are you talking about? She asked, but there was no real surprise in her voice. It was more of a challenge. A challenge to see if I knew enough to back it up. I didn't waste any time. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and showed her the text. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you. I read it out loud, watching her face for any hint of guilt. She didn't flinch. Instead, she laughed, but it wasn't the laugh of someone who was embarrassed. It was the laugh of someone who was trying to brush it off, pretending like it wasn't a big deal. Dan, it's nothing, she said, her tone flat, like she was talking to a child. You're overreacting. I felt my blood boil. She wasn't even trying to explain herself. She wasn't even offering a reason, a justification, nothing. Just brushing me off like I was the crazy one. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. I've seen the way you look at him. The way you spend time with him when I'm not around. I know what's going on. Her eyes flickered for just a second, a brief crack in her perfect facade. But she quickly covered it up, crossing her arms over her chest. You're making something out of nothing, she insisted. It's not like that. My heart was pounding. I could feel the anger and the pain building up inside me, but I wasn't going to let her off that easily. Not this time. You're telling me that after everything we've been through, after everything we've built together, that this is nothing? That you're not lying to me? That you've never had feelings for him? I asked, my voice rising. I wasn't shouting, but I knew I was on the edge. She stood up from the couch and started pacing, something she did when she was trying to avoid the conversation. I'm not having an affair, Dan, she said, her back turned to me. But I can't deny that I've been confused lately. I've been questioning things. You and I, we're not the same anymore. Things aren't how they used to be. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten. There it was, the admission that things weren't perfect. But she wasn't admitting to anything else. Are you telling me that you're questioning us because of him? I said, barely able to contain the bitterness in my voice. Because of the way you feel when you're around him? What exactly are you trying to say, Kimberly? She stopped pacing and finally turned to face me. Her eyes were cold, defensive, but there was something else there too, a flicker of guilt maybe? Or maybe it was just fear. She knew this conversation was going to get ugly. She could feel it just as much as I could. I'm not saying anything, she replied, her voice suddenly quieter. I'm just saying that I've been lost. I don't know what I want anymore, okay? It hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even apologizing for anything. She was just lost? How could she be so casual about it? So detached? Lost. I repeated, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. You've got a family, a business, everything we've worked for. And you're telling me you're lost? That you're questioning all of that for some guy? She didn't respond. She just stood there, staring at me like I was the one who was crazy. Like I was the one who had no right to be hurt. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone at her and demand that she tell me the truth, all of it, everything. But I couldn't. I knew that doing that would just push her away even further. Instead, I did the only thing that felt right in that moment. I walked away. I didn't say another word. I just turned around and left the room. There was nothing left to say anyway. The damage had already been done. The truth was clear, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, I knew it now. Kimberly had betrayed me. And no amount of words, no conversation, was going to fix it. I didn't even know if I could fix me. The next few days were a blur. I tried to go about my usual routine, work, meetings, checking in with the kids, but nothing felt the same. Every time I walked through the door, I could feel the weight of what had happened. Kimberly and I barely spoke after that confrontation. It wasn't just the distance between us, it was like she wasn't even trying to fix it. I wanted to see some remorse, some regret. But there was nothing. Not even a genuine apology. She was distant, like she had already mentally checked out. And I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought was solid. The family, the business, everything was still there, but it felt like it was all a house of cards ready to fall. I couldn't get the image out of my head, her with him. Laughing. Touching. The way she looked at him like she had never looked at me. It gnawed at me, piece by piece. I started diving into the details of what had been going on. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find, but I needed something. I needed to know how long this had been happening. Was it just a one-time thing? Or had she been lying to me for months, years even? I needed answers. I went through her phone one evening after she fell asleep. I had tried to avoid it, tried to tell myself I wasn't that kind of person, but I couldn't stop. I had to know. And there it was. Text after text. Flirty exchanges. Messages about secret meetups. The kind of stuff that should have never been in our lives. There was no denying it now. Kimberly wasn't just confused. She was making decisions. She had made her choice. I felt my stomach tighten as I scrolled through the messages. Each one felt like a stab to the chest. But it wasn't just the betrayal of her sleeping with someone else, it was the lies. The cover-ups. The excuses. The way she made everything sound so innocent, so casual. But I knew better now. I knew that every time she had kissed me, every time she had told me she loved me, it had been a lie. All of it. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept creeping back. It felt like I was suffocating in my own house. The walls were closing in. I wanted to talk to her, to confront her with what I had found, but I couldn't. I couldn't even look at her. She wasn't the woman I had married. She wasn't the person I thought I knew. So I did what I always did when I couldn't control the situation. I buried myself in work. My company needed me. I had deadlines to meet, deals to close. And for a while, it worked. I was busy. I could focus on the numbers, the strategy, the growth. It was a way to escape the mess of my life at home. But no matter how much I worked, no matter how many deals I made, the hollow feeling never went away. Every time I came home, every time I saw Kimberly's face, it was a reminder of everything that was broken. She wasn't the woman I wanted to build my life with anymore. And I wasn't sure if I even knew who she was anymore. One evening, she tried to talk to me. She came into my office while I was looking over some reports, her steps hesitant. She stood there, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, clearly nervous. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft. "About us. About everything." I didn't look up from the papers. I couldn't. I was too angry, too hurt, too confused to even face her. "I think we need to talk about this, Dan," she continued, her words slow and careful. "I want to fix it. I really do." I finally looked up at her. Her face was pale, her eyes red like she had been crying. And part of me wanted to forgive her. Part of me wanted to believe that we could fix this, that it wasn't too late. But another part of me, the part that had been buried deep down for so long, screamed at me to walk away. To stop pretending. "You want to fix this?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "You think you can just fix it with a few words? A couple of tears? Kimberly, this isn't some minor mistake. You've crossed a line. You've been lying to me, hiding things from me. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She flinched, but she didn't back down. I know I messed up. And I'm sorry, Dan. But I need you to know that I didn't mean for it to get this far. It just happened. Just happened." I repeated, my voice growing more bitter. "You didn't just accidentally fall in love with someone else, Kimberly. This wasn't an accident. You chose this." She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she just stood there, looking at me like I was the one who had wronged her. It was maddening. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I said, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not." She didn't say anything else. She just turned and walked away, leaving me in the silence of the room. And for the first time in years, I was alone with my thoughts. I was done. Done pretending. Done trying to fix something that had been broken for too long. But even as I made that decision, I couldn't help but feel like I was losing everything. The woman I thought I loved. The life I thought I'd built. The future I had carefully planned for. All of it slipping through my fingers. And all I could do was watch. The days after that conversation felt like a haze, a fog that I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. Kimberly went about her usual routine, but there was no real connection between us anymore. We were both going through the motions, making breakfast, picking up the kids, running errands, but it all felt hollow. The weight of what had happened hung in the air, thick and suffocating, and I could feel it every time I looked at her, every time she spoke. I tried to keep my distance. I didn't want to fight anymore. I didn't want to hear the same excuses, the same hollow apologies. So I buried myself in work, again. It's what I knew best, and it was the only thing that didn't feel broken. But it didn't last. I kept hearing her voice in my head, telling me she wanted to fix things, telling me she was sorry. But I wasn't sure I believed her anymore. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. The texts, the meetings, the lies. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I tried to picture us getting back to the way we were, I saw him. I saw the guy she had chosen over me. I saw the way she had looked at him. The way she'd laughed with him, touched him like she'd never touched me. The intimacy between them was undeniable, and no amount of apologies could erase that. One night, I snapped. I had been holding everything in for so long, my anger, my pain, my confusion, and it finally boiled over. I came home late, after a long day at the office. The kids were already asleep, and Kimberly was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone. I didn't even say hello. I couldn't. I was too angry. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but sharp. The words felt like knives coming out of my mouth. She looked up at me, startled, but didn't say anything. She just stared at me with those wide eyes, like she was waiting for me to calm down. But I wasn't going to calm down. Not anymore. I wasn't going to let her pretend everything was fine. I've been patient, I continued, pacing around the kitchen. I've given you space, I've listened to your excuses, but I'm done. I can't keep doing this, Kimberly. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay when it's not. I told you I'm sorry, she said, her voice shaky. I didn't mean for this to happen. I shook my head. Sorry? Is that all you've got? You think saying sorry is going to fix this? Do you even understand what you've done? You've ruined everything. You've ruined us. She stood up from the table, her face flushed. Dan, I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear to God, I didn't. I'm not the person you think I am. You're exactly the person I think you are, I spat, my words biting. You're someone who doesn't care. You're someone who only thinks about herself. You've been lying to me for months. And now, you're standing here telling me you're sorry? Sorry doesn't cut it, Kimberly. She stepped back, her eyes filling with tears. Please, just listen to me. I'm trying to fix it. I really am. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it wasn't working. The anger and betrayal were too much. I don't know if I can believe you anymore, I said quietly, the words hitting me harder than I expected. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. She broke down then, collapsing into the chair at the kitchen table, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It should have made me feel something, some sense of sympathy, some hint of the love I once had for her. But all I could feel was exhaustion. I had been carrying the weight of this relationship for so long, and now I was left with nothing but this broken shell of what we used to be. I stared at her for a long time, watching her cry, but it didn't move me like I thought it would. The woman I loved, who I had built everything with, was sitting there broken. And somehow, I realized that I didn't care as much as I thought I did. I can't keep doing this, I said, the words finally slipping out. I don't know what's left between us, but I can't pretend anymore. I need a break. I need space to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with all of this. Kimberly looked up at me, eyes wide with panic. Dan, please don't say that. Please don't leave me. But I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. So I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her there crying. That night, I stayed in the guest room. I didn't want to be near her, near the lies, near the woman who had broken everything between us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt relief. Relief that I wasn't pretending anymore. Relief that I wasn't clinging to something that was already gone. But even as I lay there, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling in my gut. That empty space where my trust in her used to be. The question that had been running through my mind for days now, it wasn't about whether I could forgive her. It was whether I even wanted to. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't sure if I ever would. The days that followed felt like a slow, suffocating crawl. I was still living in the same house, still going through the motions of daily life, but everything felt fractured. Kimberly and I didn't speak much. There was a tension in the air that we both felt but avoided acknowledging. She tried to talk to me a few times, asking if we could sit down and have a conversation, saying she wanted to make things right, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Every time I looked at her, I saw him. And every time she spoke to me, it was like I heard the lies in her voice, even if she didn't intend them. I couldn't trust her. The foundation we had built our lives on had cracked, and no matter how much she tried to fill it with apologies, it wasn't enough. The damage was done. It wasn't just the affair, though. It wasn't just the fact that she had betrayed me. It was everything that had led up to that moment, the way she had checked out of our marriage long before the affair happened, the way she had slowly pulled away from me over the years, and the way I had let it slide because I was too focused on the business, on the life I was building. I had spent so many years focused on control, on maintaining order in my life, that I had ignored the cracks in our relationship. The signs were there. The late nights, the distance, the lack of communication, it was all right in front of me, and I had refused to see it. I had convinced myself that I could handle everything, that I could fix anything, but I couldn't fix this. I couldn't fix her. The anger I had felt in the beginning started to turn into something else. Something colder. Something more final. It wasn't just about being betrayed anymore. It was about realizing that I had spent all this time in a relationship that wasn't what I thought it was. I had trusted her. I had loved her. And she had chosen him. It was hard to admit it, but I knew what I had to do. The hardest thing wasn't facing the truth about what she had done. It wasn't even about the betrayal. It was the realization that I couldn't go back to who we were. There was no fixing this. There was no going back. I spent the next few days trying to think clearly. I avoided talking to Kimberly, spending my time in the office or taking walks to clear my head. I had to make a decision. A big one. Did I want to stay in this marriage and keep fighting for something that might never be what it was? Or did I let go and try to move forward, even though it felt like my entire life was falling apart? One evening, I sat down at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in my hand, staring out the window at the dark sky. I could hear Kimberly in the other room, but I didn't want to talk to her. Not yet. I had already made up my mind. It wasn't about finding the courage to leave. It was about accepting that it was over. When she came into the kitchen, I didn't even look at her. I just spoke, my voice firm. "I think it's time we face reality, Kimberly," I said, my throat tight. Whatever this is, it's not working. We're not working." Her face dropped, and I could see the panic start to set in. She walked closer, her hands shaking. "Dan, please, just give me a chance. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. Please just don't do this." I took a deep breath, swallowing back the lump in my throat. "I don't think I can trust you anymore. And I don't think I can keep doing this to myself. To us." The tears that welled in her eyes only made it harder. I had never seen her cry like this before, genuine, uncontrollable tears. She reached out for me, but I pulled back, the distance between us now more than just physical. "I don't know what happened to us," I continued, my voice cracking slightly. "But I can't fix it. I've tried, Kimberly. I've tried, and I've been in denial. But I can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not." She dropped her hands to her sides, defeated, and just stood there silent, as if the weight of my words had taken everything from her. "I don't want to hurt you, but I need to move on," I said quietly. "I need to take control of my life again." She nodded slowly, tears running down her cheeks, but she didn't say anything else. We both knew the conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. It felt like the end of everything. But as hard as it was, I also felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. There was no more pretending. No more lies. No more waiting for something that would never come. And even though it hurt, I knew it was the right decision. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held or how to move on from the wreckage of my marriage. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. And that was a start. The days after my conversation with Kimberly were a blur of quiet, awkward moments. The house felt emptier. I focused on work, on the kids, on anything that would keep me busy and distracted. I knew I had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. Kimberly stayed distant, her eyes full of regret every time we crossed paths. But there was nothing left to say. I had made my choice, and now it was just about finding a way to live with it. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. The silence felt suffocating, but also strangely freeing. I wasn't pretending anymore. I wasn't trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. It was over. And though it hurt, I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was finally being true to myself. Weeks passed, and things slowly began to settle into a new routine. Kimberly moved out. The kids stayed with me most of the time, and I tried to focus on them, on being the dad they needed. I didn't have all the answers, but I was taking it one day at a time. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I had pushed aside in the chaos of building my life with Kimberly. I even picked up old hobbies, things I had abandoned when I got lost in the whirlwind of marriage and business. Slowly, the emptiness started to feel less overwhelming. I wasn't healed, but I was moving in the right direction. It wasn't easy. There were still nights when I'd wake up and think about everything I had lost. But more often than not, I found myself thinking about what I could gain. The future was unknown, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine to shape. And that felt good. One afternoon, I was at the park with the kids, watching them play, when something shifted in me. It wasn't a huge revelation, but it was a moment of clarity. For the first time in months, I realized that I could find happiness again. I could rebuild my life, this time on my terms. It wasn't going to be easy. There were days when the weight of everything would hit me, when I'd remember the life I'd lost. But as I watched my kids laughing, running around without a care in the world, I knew I had to keep moving forward. I didn't know what the future held, or if I'd ever be ready for a relationship again, but I wasn't going to let fear or bitterness hold me back. I wasn't broken, I was just starting over. And that, in itself, was enough for now. The weeks after that moment at the park felt different. There was a lightness to my step, a quiet optimism I hadn't felt in a long time. I was still figuring things out, but I no longer felt like I was just surviving. I was living again. I started spending more time with the kids, taking them on weekend trips, doing things I hadn't been able to do while I was stuck in the rut of my old life. I found myself laughing more, enjoying the small moments, the things I had overlooked before. Kimberly and I spoke less. It wasn't animosity, but there was a distance now that couldn't be bridged. We had our divorce proceedings, but beyond that, there was nothing left to say. I wasn't angry anymore, just resigned to the fact that we had both played a part in how things turned out. I wasn't ready to jump into anything new yet, but I had started thinking about it. Not necessarily relationships, but my own future. For the first time, I could picture a life where I wasn't shackled by the past. I had a long road ahead, but I wasn't as scared of it anymore. And that felt like a win. Months went by, and the ache of the past started to fade. The divorce was finalized, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. I had my kids full-time, and I was figuring out how to balance everything: parenting, work, and slowly rebuilding my life. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through some old papers, when I found a letter from Kimberly. It was one of the last things she had written to me before we separated. She had apologized again, this time without the excuses. There was an honesty in her words, a recognition of her mistakes. And while part of me still felt bitter, part of me realized that it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't holding on to that pain anymore. I put the letter down, not with anger, but with a quiet sense of closure. I had let go. Not just of her, but of the version of me that had been consumed by the relationship. The hurt, the betrayal, it was all part of my past now. And it wasn't who I was anymore. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew this: I had a second chance at my life. And this time, I was going to make it count. I woke up one morning feeling different. Maybe it was the light in the room or the quiet stillness of the house, but I could feel the weight of the last few years lifting off my shoulders. The days of emotional turmoil and constant doubt felt like they were behind me. It wasn't that the pain was gone. Hell, there were still nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made the right decisions. But that feeling of suffocating under the weight of everything was no longer with me. The kids were growing up fast, and as I watched them play in the backyard, I realized how much I had missed out on while I was caught up in the mess of my marriage. I had given so much of myself to Kimberly and to a life that now felt like a distant memory. But watching them laugh, seeing their excitement over the smallest things, reminded me that I still had so much to live for. I had let go of the past, but the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I wasn't naive enough to think it would be. There were still moments when the loneliness crept in, when the memories of what I had with Kimberly would hit me like a wave. I had invested so much into that relationship, into that life, that sometimes it was hard to imagine a future without it. But as the days went by, I realized something important: I didn't need to rush into anything. I didn't need to fill the emptiness with someone or something else. I had spent so much of my life controlling everything, trying to fix problems before they even started. But now, I was learning to let go of that control. To live in the moment, to appreciate what I had, without constantly worrying about what came next. I started to find joy in the simple things. It was as though I was learning to experience life again for the first time. Going for long walks alone, sitting in a cafe and watching people go by, picking up books I had always meant to read but never had the time for. I wasn't rushing to find happiness, I was letting it come to me. I reconnected with old friends too. People I had neglected during my marriage, consumed by the chaos and the constant juggling of responsibilities. It felt good to laugh with them again, to hear about their lives and share stories from mine. It reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. There were people who cared about me, who supported me, no matter how lost I had felt. But there were also hard moments. Ones I couldn't avoid. The kids' birthdays, holidays, and family gatherings where I would look around and feel that sharp sting of loss. The absence of Kimberly at those moments was more glaring than I cared to admit. It was hard to adjust, to accept that the life I had once envisioned was no longer going to happen. The family I thought I had, the future I had planned, it was all gone. Still, I had my kids. They were my everything. And while it was tough navigating this new life without Kimberly, I found purpose in raising them the best way I could. I made sure they knew they were loved, that they weren't the cause of anything that had happened. I didn't want them to grow up with the same confusion and pain that I had experienced. There were times when I felt overwhelmed, when the weight of being both a father and a provider hit me harder than usual. But I was determined to be there for them, no matter what. I was learning to balance it all, my career, my role as a father, and the slow process of rediscovering who I was outside of the relationship I had lost. I also realized something else, that it was okay to grieve. It was okay to miss the version of my life I thought I'd have. It didn't mean I was weak. It didn't mean I hadn't made the right decision. It just meant that I was human, that I had loved, and I had lost, and that was something I couldn't just sweep under the rug. I had been avoiding the truth about my emotions for so long, burying them beneath work, beneath the structure and control I so desperately clung to. But now, I was starting to face them head-on. The sadness, the anger, the loneliness. It was all part of the healing process. I couldn't outrun it anymore, and I didn't want to. I had to feel it to move on. There were still days when I wondered if I'd ever love again, if I'd ever trust someone the way I had trusted Kimberly. But the more I focused on rebuilding my own life, the more I realized that it didn't matter right now. I didn't need to rush into a new relationship or try to fill the void that had been left. What mattered was learning to love myself again, to accept who I was outside of my marriage. The more I leaned into that, the more I realized I wasn't the same person I was when Kimberly and I first met. I had changed, and so had she. Maybe that was the hardest part, to accept that the love we once had wasn't enough to keep us together. But in a strange way, I felt grateful for that time in my life. It had shaped me into who I was now, and while the ending had been painful, I had learned invaluable lessons along the way. There were still moments when I'd miss the life I had with her, moments when I'd wish things had turned out differently. But I knew now that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't go back. The only thing I had control over was my future. And that future, for the first time in a long time, felt full of possibility. As the months passed, the sense of relief grew. I was no longer haunted by the weight of the past, but I still carried the lessons learned. I had my moments of loneliness and doubt, but I also found strength I didn't know I had. I was beginning to heal, not in big dramatic leaps, but in quiet small steps. I spent more time with the kids, making sure they knew they were everything to me. My work still kept me busy, but I was no longer consumed by it. I had started finding time for things I enjoyed again, reading, hiking, simple moments of peace I had neglected before. One day, while driving to pick up the kids, I realized something important. I was no longer angry. Not at Kimberly, not at life. The bitterness that once consumed me had slowly dissolved, and what was left was a quiet acceptance. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape the future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that. Tea wasn't until one afternoon, sitting on the porch watching the sunset with my kids, that I fully understood how far I'd come. The last few years had tested me in ways I never imagined, but in those moments of calm, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was living. I wasn't perfect, and I wasn't done healing, but I was learning to embrace the unknown. Life had thrown me off course, but instead of clinging to what I couldn't control, I was starting to enjoy the journey again. The pain wasn't gone. The memories of the past still lingered in the corners of my mind. But I wasn't defined by them anymore. I was moving forward, not just for the kids, but for myself. The future felt uncertain, but for the first time, I didn't fear it. There was a quiet confidence in knowing that, no matter what came next, I was ready to face it. And maybe, just maybe, this new chapter would be better than I ever expected. I woke up that morning with a different kind of peace than I'd ever known. The house was quiet, just the hum of the coffee maker and the soft morning light streaming in through the windows. The kids were still asleep, and I had a rare moment to myself. For once, there was no weight on my chest, no swirling storm in my mind. Just stillness. I spent the day getting things done, but I also made time for myself. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty for taking a moment to breathe. I was no longer trying to fix everything, no longer pretending I had it all under control. Instead, I was embracing the flow of life, the unexpected twists and turns, and it felt freeing. When the kids woke up, we spent the afternoon at the park. They were laughing, running around without a care in the world, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about the past or what I'd lost. I was just enjoying the present. I didn't have all the answers, and maybe I never would. But as I watched my kids play, I realized that was okay. What mattered was that I was here, fully present, and ready for whatever came next. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me anymore. I was writing a new story now, one where I was no longer lost in the wreckage of my old life. And that, in itself, felt like the beginning of something good.